If one day, you gave a meal to a homeless person, and didn't know that person was one of the most powerful billionaires in the United States, hiding among the sidewalks, what would you do if you found out? You hadn't just given a meal, but a beginning to love. This is a true story, more real than any fairy tale. The last meal on the sidewalk. Before we begin, if you believe there are still good people in the world, hit that subscribe button on Gentle Heart Stories, where hearts of compassion meet. Alina, 26, lives in a busy neighborhood in Manhattan, New York. She's not wealthy, and she doesn't live in a spacious apartment with all the luxuries. She's just a part-time worker at a small bakery. But every evening after work, she dedicates some precious time walking the streets, bringing hot meals to the homeless. She never counts the people she helps, and she never thinks of it as an obligation. For Alina, it's just a way to preserve the human values in life. Since her father passed away from hunger and cold while living on the streets, Alina's heart changed forever. She remembers that day well. She was only 18 when her father tirelessly knocked on doors, hoping to find a small job to survive. But the cold of that winter took his life. Alina couldn't accept that someone had to die from hunger in the middle of a crowded city where people have everything they need. After losing her father, she promised herself she would never let anyone suffer like that. She would do everything she could to ensure the homeless were not forgotten in this bustling city. Every day, Alina spends at least an hour after work to bring food to the hungry, homeless. She walks through familiar streets, handing out warm meals, even if they aren't full meals, just what she can offer. Even though sometimes she's tired from her job at the bakery, when she sees the smiling faces, thanking her for the small meal, her heart is filled with energy. To her, a meal can change someone's life, even if only for a moment. One cold winter afternoon, Alina brought a special meal she'd cooked early that morning, a traditional soup her father used to make for the family. The sweet aroma of the soup wafted from the old paper box. When she stopped at a small corner near the subway station, a common spot where the homeless gathered, she encountered an older man, with long, unkempt hair and a scruffy beard, sitting hunched beneath an old coat. She walked up, seeing his eyes looking at her, as if searching for something, or perhaps simply seeking attention. "Hello, sir. Would you like some soup?" Alina asked gently, offering the box. The man didn't answer immediately. He looked her up and down, his eyes lighting up without saying a word. The feeling inside Alina was hard to describe. She wasn't someone easily moved, but his gaze softened her heart. "I made this soup from my father's recipe," Alina added with a gentle smile. Her words weren't just about satisfying a meal, they were a friendly greeting, a spiritual sharing, a way of saying, "I don't see you as a homeless person, I see you as a human being." Finally, the man spoke. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse. He didn't say anything else, just silently accepted the meal and bowed his head in gratitude. For Alina, it was a strange moment. Though he didn't say much, in his eyes, she could feel warmth that words couldn't express. In that moment it was as if everything around them disappeared, and there was only her and this stranger, in the bustling streets of New York. This man, whom Alina had never met, didn't know the name of, made her heart stir in a strange way. She couldn't fully understand why, but the feeling she had about him was something very special. It wasn't pity or simple sympathy, but an invisible connection. And perhaps, deep in the man's heart, there was a similar feeling. David, that man, was not truly homeless. He was a reclusive billionaire in the financial world, known for bold investment decisions and successful projects. But for the past 3 weeks, he had been disguising himself as a homeless man, living in ragged clothes and sitting in street corners like this every day. David was conducting a secret humanitarian project, a test of the lives of the poor and the real emotions they experience. He wanted to understand them, not from the perspective of a wealthy person, but from the heart of an ordinary person, so he could help them more deeply in future projects. And when Alina entered his life, through a simple meal and a smile, something profound began in David's heart. He couldn't put his feelings into words, but for the first time in 3 weeks of living as a homeless man, he felt warmth spreading through his heart, as if Alina had given him a simple happiness he had never understood. A young person with little to give, but capable of changing his life with such a small act. Day by day, Alina kept showing up, like clockwork, a habit she couldn't break, even in the busy whirlwind of her life. Each afternoon, she carried a small lunchbox, sometimes soup, sometimes stew with rice and meat, simple dishes she could whip up with the modest ingredients she had. But to Alina, it was all she could offer. She never asked the man's name, never questioned his past. Nor was she curious about any secrets he might keep. Simply put, she felt that sometimes, strangers who enter our lives don't need to share everything for a true connection to form. All it took was a glance, a gentle smile, and a kind act. That's how Alina treated him every day. She would arrive, place the meal next to him, and wish him an enjoyable meal. Every time she saw him quietly accept the food, Alina's heart would light up with simple joy. Though he didn't say much, she always sensed his gratitude in his small gestures, in the twinkle in his eyes when he looked at her. Their relationship could be described as nameless, unspoken, but it overflowed with empathy and understanding. For David, those afternoons when Alina appeared became something truly meaningful. Each day, he looked forward to that moment, the moment when she would arrive, set down the meal, smile, and then quietly leave. But for David, it wasn't just about the food. It was the connection he couldn't find anywhere else. She never asked about his past, never questioned why he sat there. Never demanded he tell his life story. And it was this that gave him a strange sense of peace. Over the long days when he waited for Alina, it wasn't because of hunger or the food, it was because of her gentle gaze. There was something in the way she looked at him that made him feel like he wasn't completely invisible, that someone in this world saw him, even if only for a fleeting moment. That day, after receiving the meal from Alina, David stayed seated for a while longer. He didn't want to leave right away, even though everything around him was still the same, the busy streets, the noisy traffic, people passing by without noticing him. But since meeting Alina, he found it easier to breathe a little bit. Part of it was probably because of her gaze. There was something in the way she looked at him that made him feel less alone. Even though she didn't say much, just wishing him a good meal before walking away, her eyes spoke a sincerity that couldn't be mistaken. And every time, he couldn't help but feel a strange longing when she left. On one of those occasions, Alina sat beside him, handed him the meal, and began sharing her story. She spoke of her father, a man who had spent his life battling poverty but remained resilient and strong. Her father had once been an engineer, with a stable job and a fulfilling life, until an unforeseen event changed everything. The company he worked for collapsed, and he lost everything in one night. Without a job and with no home, he became homeless, wandering the streets. She remembered the day her father passed away clearly. He died in a small, cold, and empty room, hungry and alone. No one knew about him. Only Alina felt the painful loss. That was why she couldn't bear to see other homeless people. She felt they shouldn't be forgotten, and if she could, she would do everything she could to help them. As she spoke, Alina couldn't hold back her emotions, and tears welled up in her eyes. David listened, feeling a lump in his throat. Her words were a reminder of his own past. His father had also been poor, doing whatever jobs he could to feed his family. But he remained strong no matter what. And it was his father who had inspired David to pursue his career and become successful. But now, hearing Alina talk about her father, David realized that resilience wasn't just about standing strong in the face of adversity, it was about compassion, about loving and caring for those weaker than oneself. Alina's story made him remember the difficult times his father had faced, and his heart tightened. He felt small in the presence of people like Alina, those who could bring faith and hope to others without needing recognition or reward. Though he never said it, David began to feel a strange sense of guilt. He had lived a luxurious life, enjoying things many only dream of. But while he lived in comfort, millions of people like Alina were using all their strength to preserve the good values in the world. This made him feel guilty. Perhaps he had focused too much on things that didn't matter, forgetting what truly did. And the regret only deepened with time. Every time Alina came, every time she smiled and handed him the meal, he felt himself getting closer to a realization he never thought he'd have. What Alina didn't know was that, during those long days, the man with the scruffy beard and tangled hair had been watching her not just with his eyes, but with a heart that was gradually changing. He no longer saw her as a stranger. She wasn't just the one who brought him food, she was the one who gave him a feeling he'd never experienced before, the feeling of real connection. And from those brief moments, David began to understand that in this life, we don't always need to know everything about someone to love them. A sincere heart is enough. Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue with the program, we kindly ask that you leave a comment with your thoughts and reflections in the comments section below. If you find the program meaningful, don't hesitate to share it to support the channel and spread the value to those around you. We wish you a truly meaningful time listening. One day, when the rain was pouring heavily, Alina arrived late. The rain showed no sign of stopping, and the streets of Manhattan became hazy with the torrents of water coming down from above. She didn't have an umbrella. Only a small bag with a few boxes of food and bread that she had prepared in the morning. Her feet were soaked, and the puddles on the streets seemed like little lakes welcoming her. Despite the rain hitting her face, despite the biting cold wind blowing through her fingers, Alina kept walking without hesitation. For her, it was part of her daily routine, the need to be on time to bring food to those who needed it. She never gave much thought to the challenges she faced during that journey. When Alina finally reached the corner where David usually sat, she noticed that he was standing under a nearby awning, looking out at the street. David wasn't in a hurry like usual, but when he saw her, he didn't say anything. He simply stepped out and draped his old, torn coat over her shoulders. The coat, though old and worn, was surprisingly warm against the chill of the rain. Alina looked at him, her eyes shining with gratitude, and she smiled gently as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "Thank you, but it's all right, you don't have to do that," Alina said, her voice sweet and gentle. But David said nothing, only standing silently watching her, his eyes no longer the cold gaze they once were. His look was now warm, as if something inside him was slowly shifting, an emotion he had never known before. For the first time, after days of silence, David took the initiative to ask her a question, one he had wanted to ask for a long time but had never had the chance. "Why do you do this every day?" His voice was deep, tinged with curiosity. The question wasn't out of doubt, but of genuine curiosity, as if he wanted to understand more about this girl, about what drove her to persist in this work day after day. Alina paused for a moment, looked at him, and smiled lightly. She didn't think for long because the answer seemed obvious to her. Because if no one does it, then who will give them hope? Her answer was simple, yet contained an entire world within it. Alina didn't need to say anything more, for that one sentence had already conveyed everything she felt and believed. The homeless people in the city, those abandoned by society, needed more than just food or material gifts. They needed something intangible, something far more valuable, hope. And that was why she never gave up. David stood frozen, her answer left him speechless for a long time. His gaze became distant, as if he was reflecting on things he had never thought about before. The figures in the multi-million-dollar projects he had carried out, the successes he had achieved, suddenly seemed small and insignificant. The money he had earned, the luxurious mansions, the fancy cars, all of it seemed unimportant now. For him, at that moment, there was only one thing that mattered, Alina's words. Hope. That was what David suddenly realized he had long forgotten, and to break the silence, Alina looked at him and asked in return, "What about you? How long have you lived here?" Her question was gentle, but it made David feel exposed. He hadn't expected her to ask about his life, yet it made him instinctively want to answer. However, he merely shook his head and responded vaguely, "Long enough to understand that the world out there doesn't care who I am." The answer was incomplete, but it spoke volumes about the loneliness and despair he had felt all these years. David didn't want to say too much, didn't want to share everything, but he truly knew that in all the days he had lived in luxury, he had never seen things the way Alina did, never felt the coldness, the invisibility of those living outside of society. After a while, Alina took out a small box of cookies she had prepared earlier that day. This was the snack she carried with her every day to share with those she met. Today, she didn't have the lunch boxes to hand out, just the little cake she made from flour, sugar, and milk. She handed David half of the cake, and they shared it together in the cold of the rain. This was the first time David smiled sincerely in many years. His smile wasn't because of something joyful, but because of the simplicity of the moment. For the first time in a long while, he felt that he truly existed. Not as a billionaire, not as a person of power, but as an ordinary man, sitting and sharing a meal with someone else. The rain continued to fall, the tiny droplets rolling across the ground, but in their hearts, something silently began to sprout. Neither of them said anything profound, but from that moment on, there was a deeper connection between them than just sharing a box of food or a piece of cake. It was the sharing of hearts. And perhaps from that day onward, each time they met, each time Alina smiled, David's heart would flutter just a little bit more. David gradually spent more time sitting on the sidewalk than what the project had originally required. At first, he had thought he would only sit for a limited period of time, taking notes on his observations, to develop initiatives to help the homeless. But things didn't turn out that simply. Gradually, the notes and measurements became irrelevant. The relationships, the stories he heard from people he once considered invisible, were what truly mattered. And Alina, the small girl who had become an inseparable part of his life. Every day, he looked forward to the moment he would see her, to hear her simple yet deeply humane words of encouragement. David no longer cared about time. He arrived early on the sidewalk, waiting for her as if it was the only meaningful part of his day. In the silent moments spent sitting on the sidewalk, his eyes didn't just follow Alina, he observed the people around him, those whom society had forgotten. These were people with nothing but the simple existence and small hopes. This realization made him feel more troubled, as he had never truly understood their lives until he became a part of it. Not as a powerful billionaire, but as a homeless person, nameless and ageless, with only life in each passing moment. Every day, he accepted the food Alina brought, her words of encouragement, and especially the sincere gaze she gave him. This was not just a humanitarian experiment, this had become a part of his life, a part he had never considered before, but as David sank deeper into these thoughts, the people at his company began to worry. They noticed his unusual absence and were unable to contact him. Important meetings, long-planned projects, were all postponed, and no one knew where he was. A close assistant, who had worked with David for many years, decided to find him. She was the one who knew David best, a man who never shirked work or allowed things to fall into chaos. She kept calling, sending messages, and eventually decided to search for him at the place where she suspected he might be. The assistant found David one rainy morning, sitting on the sidewalk as usual, absorbed in watching Alina. She noticed the change in his eyes, a calmness and serenity he had never had before. When she approached, David simply smiled softly and said, "I'm fine. Don't worry about me." But inside, he knew he couldn't continue hiding this truth for much longer. Meanwhile, the days living in the guise of a homeless person made David begin to doubt himself. Would Alina still treat him like an ordinary person if she knew who he truly was? He worried about the relationship that had been forming between them. Would it still remain intact when the truth was revealed? And would she feel betrayed, knowing he had hidden his true identity for so long? This question haunted David every time he looked at Alina. Especially on a day when Alina brought a small notebook, containing messages she had collected from the homeless people she met. These people had written thank you notes to David, without knowing who he really was. Some thanked him for bringing them hope on cold nights, while others expressed gratitude for making them feel valued. These notes were brief, but contained a sincere emotion that few could put into words. Each thank you note was like a small flicker of light in the dark lives of people abandoned by society. David took the notebook, his heart heavy as he read each line. These were not just thank you notes for him, but for someone they would never know. The homeless didn't need to know who he was, they only needed to know that he was a part of this world, and his presence had brought them a glimmer of hope during their darkest days. David was deeply moved. For the first time, he felt that the project he had worked on for so long became meaningless without the true love that Alina had shown. This project, with its large numbers and clear strategies, could never compare to the simplicity in Alina's actions. She didn't need grand plans, numbers, or data, she only needed sincerity and love for those whom society had forgotten. Alina had taught him that sometimes, simple actions could have a much deeper meaning than anything we could ever imagine. The intangible but most precious things, like love and compassion, were what truly created change in this world, but at the same time, David knew that his time as a homeless person was running out. He couldn't keep up this facade forever, even though it had become a part of his life. And he didn't know how to leave without hurting Alina. He feared that when the truth was revealed, she would feel deceived, that she would feel betrayed by the person she had developed feelings for. David didn't know what to do to end this experiment without leaving scars in Alina's heart. He only hoped that, no matter what, she would understand his true motivations, understand that everything he did was just to find a way to make the world a better place. But would she understand that? Would Alina forgive him when she learned the truth? These questions haunted David's mind, and he didn't know how to face them. One early morning, just like any other day, Alina woke up very early to prepare meals for the homeless. She had gotten used to doing this every day, cooking hot meals, preparing soups, always carrying a little hope for those without shelter. She walked out of her small house in the neighborhood and quietly made her way to the spot where David usually sat, at the small corner near the subway station. But today, when she arrived, everything was completely different. The area of the sidewalk where David sat every day was empty. There was no sign of the bearded man, no look of deep understanding in his eyes, no presence of him for her to greet as usual. Alina looked around in confusion, not understanding what was happening. She sat down on the steps, a sense of emptiness filling her heart. They had become familiar with each other, shared quiet moments and simple words of encouragement, yet now, suddenly, he was gone without a trace. Alina looked around, silently hoping to see a familiar figure, but there was nothing except the cold space of the morning. Her heart tightened. Their bond, though simple, had become an irreplaceable part of her life. For the first time in years, Alina felt this empty. She could not accept David's disappearance. She could not believe he wouldn't return. Immediately, she began walking through the familiar streets, asking the homeless people she had met, hoping someone would know where David had gone. She asked those she knew, people she had shared meals with, those she had helped over the days, but no one knew where he had gone. They only knew that he hadn't appeared since yesterday. Alina became more and more distressed, her heart weighed down by the question, why did David leave without saying goodbye? The more she searched, the greater her anxiety grew. Every corner, every familiar street seemed colder than ever. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, Alina sat down on the sidewalk, tears welling up in her eyes. For the first time since her father passed away, she cried. These tears were not just for the loss of David, but also because she realized how much she had depended on someone she couldn't hold on to. At that moment, David had returned to his luxurious suit, the polished appearance of a billionaire. He stood at a distance, watching Alina from across the street. His heart was heavy, but he dared not approach her. His pride, his fear of being seen as a deceiver, kept him from moving closer. He feared that once Alina knew the truth, the affection she had for him would crumble. He couldn't bear the thought of becoming the person she felt betrayed by. Yet, he longed to meet her, to tell her he was still here, still cared, but silence seemed to be the only thing he could offer right now. Watching Alina sitting alone, emotions surged within him. He recalled their small conversations, the gentle words of encouragement, the care she had shown him, and he realized that he had been drawn into her love without even realizing it. But he couldn't let the truth come out too soon. To make sure Alina was okay, David secretly sent someone close to him to watch her. He wanted to know if she was truly okay without his presence in her life. The assistant assigned to this task followed Alina and saw her continue her daily work of distributing food, tirelessly. Even though Alina was sad or worried in her heart, she still persevered in bringing meals to the homeless, still smiling, still kind to them. What she did was not just for work, but because of the love she had for these lost people in society. This made David's heart even heavier. He realized that Alina was not just a girl delivering food to the poor, she was a symbol of compassion and resilience, a source of motivation for an entire small community. Day by day, Alina continued her work, even though her heart was breaking from the disappearance of the friend she had come to see as part of her life. One morning, when she brought a box of food for the homeless, she left a small letter on the sidewalk. It was a short letter, but it contained all the feelings she couldn't express directly. In the letter, she wrote, "If you're still alive, know that every meal I cook is because you made me believe, kindness is never wasted." These words, though simple, were filled with the emotions Alina had for David, emotions she had never openly expressed. She didn't know if he would read it, but she hoped that he would understand, that everything she did was not just out of duty or responsibility. But because of her belief in humanity, David saw the letter from a few meters away, and his heart suddenly ached. He couldn't leave, he couldn't let Alina continue to live in doubt, couldn't let her feel betrayed. That was when David realized that no matter what happened, he couldn't leave her. The feelings he had for Alina were not just gratitude or appreciation. They were love, a deep connection that he couldn't give up. David knew he had to face the truth and the consequences of it. But most importantly, he could not let Alina face this loneliness alone. One evening, as winter crept through the streets of New York, Alina was preparing her usual meals for the homeless. She carried a special soup she had personally cooked. A dish she had made for many years with the hope of bringing warmth to those lost on the streets. She had gradually grown accustomed to this life, to the rainy evenings, to the gentle steps on the sidewalks, and to the grateful eyes of those living on the fringes of society. Every time she brought food, she felt she was doing something meaningful, even if small. But that day, as Alina was serving the food, a luxurious car suddenly stopped at the curb. She turned around, and in a moment of shock, an image she never could have imagined appeared. It wasn't the man with the scruffy beard and messy hair she had seen every day. It was David, the man she knew, but now he was no longer homeless. He was standing tall in an elegant, sophisticated suit. In that instant, everything around her seemed to fade away. Alina couldn't believe her eyes. Why was he here like this? Why was he standing in front of her, dressed like this? She froze, unable to utter a word. David looked at her, his gaze sincere and full of regret. He stepped closer to Alina and bowed his head in respect. "I'm sorry for keeping this from you," he said, his voice deep and warm, but tinged with tension. "But I've never met anyone as kind as you, and I want you to know the truth." David's words broke the silence between them like a storm. Alina couldn't believe that the man she had helped, the one with whom she had shared quiet moments on the sidewalk, was the billionaire she had never imagined. Until then, she had thought of him as just another homeless man, like the others she often encountered, yet he was the one the whole world admired. She stood there, unsure of how to react. Her surprise overwhelmed her emotions. After a long silence, Alina simply looked at him, unable to speak. But then, a gentle smile appeared on her lips, not with anger or reproach, but with calm and understanding. "I know," she said, her voice warm. "A meal can't change the world, but it can change a heart. And I'm glad that happened for you." Her words were like a gentle forgiveness, with no judgment, no demand. She had understood that what she did wasn't just to help a homeless man, it was an act of unconditional love, regardless of anyone's status or past. David felt a strong surge of emotion rise within him. He had never imagined that, one day, the love and kindness he had witnessed could change his own life. He looked at Alina, the girl he had never fully understood, yet the only one who made him feel truly alive in a world filled with numbers and dry contracts. "Alina," David said, his voice suddenly serious and determined, "I want to invite you to be the director of a new charity organization I'm about to establish. This will be an organization to help the homeless, like the people you've dedicated your heart to. I believe you are the only one who can lead it." Alina looked at him, her gaze filled with surprise. Until now, she had only hoped to do small things. But now she realized that her actions could create an even larger impact. However, she didn't rush to answer, she just looked at him, feeling a sudden surge of emotions within her. After their brief conversation, David took Alina to a luxurious restaurant, but not for dinner, rather for a surprise invitation. They sat in a magnificent space, with candlelight shimmering and the atmosphere warm, but the meal wasn't just an ordinary dinner. It was a meal of new beginnings, a meal of emotions, of things that couldn't be measured by money. They didn't need to speak much, they only looked at each other, and in their gazes, there were unspoken words. David looked at Alina with respect and gratitude. While Alina felt that, although everything around them might change, the feelings she had for him had never wavered. They had dinner together, but there were no grand words. They just needed to be quietly together, understanding that, no matter how complicated life got, love and kindness were still the most beautiful things. And that was what kept them finding peace within themselves. In the end, the story concluded with the image of Alina and David, two people from two different worlds. One was a wealthy billionaire, the other a young woman with a heart full of compassion. But in that moment, in the heart of New York City, they met at the right time, in the right place, to write a story about kindness, love, and the most beautiful things that humans can offer one another. This was not a story about money or power, but about simple actions, decisions made from the heart, things that can change the life of any individual, no matter who they are or where they are. Thank you for following the emotional and humanitarian journey of Alina and David. From simple meals on the sidewalks of New York to the love and kindness that changed their lives, this story is not just a love story, but also a lesson in kindness, humanity, and the simple yet profound things in life. And if you also believe that stories of kindness and change can make the world a better place, don't forget to follow Gentle Heart Stories for more amazing tales to come. After that warm dinner, Alina and David were no longer strangers. They were friends, partners, working together to build a better future for those who needed help. David understood that not all the wealth in the world could change everything, but that simple acts of kindness, even small ones, could create a miracle. And Alina, with her ever-open heart, became not only the leader of a charity organization but also an inspiration to a community, to a world. Ultimately, this story doesn't just end with a warm meal, but with the beginning of a new journey, a journey of change, love, and compassion. They didn't need grand speeches or promises, only sincerity and determination from two hearts that were always open. That's the message this story wants to convey. No matter how the world changes, kindness remains the light that guides us, the one thing we must always preserve and give away. If you loved this story and want to continue exploring more emotional and humanitarian journeys, don't forget to subscribe to the Gentle Heart Stories channel. Thank you for joining us, and we hope this story has brought you faith and hope, just like Alina and David found. Let these stories inspire your heart, and together, we can make this world a better place.